History has a sense of humor, a dark, chaotic, and occasionally stupid sense of humor. What you are about to see are 111 real moments when humanity completely outdid itself. Not with brilliance, but with pure absurdity. Emperors running from bunnies, cities destroyed by molasses, and official wars declared on birds. These aren't myths or jokes. They are all 100% true. Proof that the story of humanity is less of a triumph and more of an ongoing comedy. 1. The most powerful man in Europe was defeated by fluffy bunnies in 1807. Napoleon Bonaparte wanted to celebrate a treaty with a rabbit hunt, so his chief of staff bought nearly 3,000 tame rabbits from local farmers. But when the cages opened, the rabbits did not run away. In fear, they actually charged straight at the emperor, thinking he was the guy with the food. It was total chaos, as thousands of hungry bunnies swarmed Napoleon and climbed his legs and jacket until the little conquerors forced the great military genius to run to his carriage. The Emperor of France actually retreated from a battlefield because he was outnumbered by hungry farm animals. 2. Boston faced the stickiest disaster in history when a massive tank burst in 1919. A 25-foot wave of hot molasses crashed through the streets at 35 miles per hour, destroying buildings and trapping horses like flies on sticky paper. It sounded like machine gun fire as the rivets popped, and then the brown syrup tsunami flattened the neighborhood while people tried to outrun the goo. The smell of sweet syrup hung over the city for decades, and locals claim you can still smell molasses on hot summer days. It was a tragic but absolutely ridiculous way for a city to suffer such huge destruction from baking ingredients. 3. Oregon officials had a really bad idea in 1970 when a dead sperm whale washed ashore. They decided the best way to get rid of the 45-foot carcass was to stuff it with half a ton of dynamite. They thought the blast would vaporize the whale into tiny pieces for seagulls to eat, but they were wrong. The explosion sent massive chunks of rotting blubber flying through the air like meat meteors raining down on terrified spectators. One huge piece completely crushed a car parked a quarter-mile away, while the smell was absolutely unbearable. It remains the most explosive cleanup failure in American history. 4. A chicken in Colorado refused to die even after a farmer chopped off his head for dinner. In 1945, a Wyandotte rooster named Mike survived his own execution because the axe missed his jugular vein and left the brainstem intact. Mike, the headless chicken, lived for another 18 months and became a national celebrity, earning thousands of dollars on tour. His owner fed him milk and water with an eyedropper directly into his open esophagus while people paid 25 cents to see the miracle bird. Mike eventually died in a motel room in Arizona because he choked, and his owner forgot the eyedropper. 5. The Roman Emperor Caligula once declared war on the ocean because he was bored and crazy. He marched his powerful army all the way to the coast of Gaul to fight the sea god Neptune, but obviously the ocean did not fight back. Caligula ordered his confused soldiers to stab the water with their swords and throw spears at the waves to show dominance. Then he commanded them to fill their helmets with seashells as the spoils of war to take back to Rome. It was the most embarrassing military victory in history, where grown men fought saltwater and claimed victory over wet sand. 6. The Pope accidentally helped start the Black Death because he hated cats. In 1233, Pope Gregory IX issued a document claiming that black cats were instruments of Satan and evil. Superstitious people across Europe started killing every cat they could find to save their souls from the devil. But with the cat population destroyed, the rat population exploded uncontrollably and carried the plague bacteria everywhere. The lack of predators allowed the disease to wipe out millions of people who did not realize their kitty cats were actually protecting them. It was a holy decree that backfired in the most deadly way possible. 7. France tried to cancel God during the Revolution and replaced religion with the weird cult of reason. The government seized chaotic control of churches and stripped out the altars to hold wild festivals for their new state atheism. They even dressed up women in white Roman robes to act as the living goddess of reason and paraded them through the Notre Dame Cathedral. It was like a massive statewide theater production where logic was worshipped like a deity, but it just confused the peasants. The whole experiment ended quickly, when Robespierre decided he wanted his own cult of the supreme being instead. 8. San Francisco once had a homeless man who declared himself the Emperor of the United States. Joshua Norton went broke in 1859 and decided he was now royalty, so he issued a proclamation commanding the army to dissolve Congress. Instead of arresting him, the city just played along and treated him like a real monarch for 20 years. Police officers saluted him on the street and restaurants gave him free meals while he printed his own currency that local shops actually accepted. 20,000 people attended his funeral because he was the most beloved fake leader in the history of the country. 9. British spies won a major battle in World War II by dressing up a dead homeless man. Intelligence officers found a corpse in a London morgue and created a fake identity for him named Major William Martin. They stuffed his pockets with fake love letters and secret battle plans that said the Allies would attack Greece instead of Sicily. Then they dumped the body off the coast of Spain where they knew Nazi spies would find it. Hitler fell for the trick completely and moved his tanks to the wrong country. The Allies invaded Sicily successfully, all thanks to a dead guy. 10. Two Italian cities went to war and killed thousands of people just because of a wooden bucket. In 1325, soldiers from Modena snuck into Bologna and stole an oak bucket from a city well as a trophy. The people of Bologna were so insulted that they declared full-scale war to get their pail back. A massive battle took place where 2,000 men died fighting over the cheap water container. Modena won the battle, and they still have the bucket on display in a bell tower today. It remains the stupidest reason for a lethal conflict in European military history. 11. A guy started his own country on a rusted platform in the ocean and actually got away with it for decades. In 1967, Paddy Roy Bates climbed onto an abandoned World War II sea fort off the coast of England and declared it the Principality of Sealand. The British government tried to kick him out, but a judge ruled the fort was in international waters, so the laws did not apply there. Bates made his wife a princess and issued his own passports while defending his tiny metal nation with warning shots against the Navy. It is the only country in the world that is basically just a concrete slab in the middle of cold, salty water. 12. Andrew Jackson was a tough president, but his pet parrot was even tougher and much ruder. The parrot named Pole had to be forcibly removed from Jackson's funeral in 1845 because it would not stop screaming profanity at the mourners. The bird had learned all its bad words from listening to the president curse during his angry rants at the White House. People were trying to cry and pay their respects, but the bird kept dropping F-bombs and swearing loudly in the quiet church. It was a hilarious final tribute. That proved the parrot was truly the only creature that listened to the old general. 13. Canada suffered a nightmare in 1917 when two ships collided and created the biggest explosion before the atomic bomb. A French cargo ship loaded with high explosives crashed in the Halifax harbor and caught fire while crowds gathered to watch the smoke. The ship erupted with a force of 3 kilotons of TNT and vaporized the ship instantly while flattening the entire city district. The blast was so powerful it shattered windows 50 miles away and caused a tsunami that wiped out the survivors on the shore. It was a tragic accident that showed the world just how dangerous shipping logistics could be when explosives are handled poorly. 14. An entire colony of people vanished into thin air and left behind the creepiest clue in American history. In the late 1500s, over 100 settlers established a home on Roanoke Island, hoping to start a new life in the New World. When a supply ship returned 3 years later, the village was completely abandoned with no signs of struggle or bodies anywhere. The only thing they found was the word Croatoan carved deeply into a wooden fence post like a mysterious message. To this day, nobody knows if they were killed by natives or just decided to move to a better island, without telling anyone. 15. The Canadian government once kidnapped 5 baby girls to turn them into a highly profitable tourist attraction. The Dion quintuplets were born in 1934 and were the first set of 5 babies to survive infancy, which was a massive medical miracle. The state took custody, claiming the parents were unfit, and built a human zoo called Quintland, where crowds watched the kids play through glass. 3 million tourists visited the girls, making the government millions of dollars while the children lived in total isolation. It was a disturbing reality show decades before television, where the government ruthlessly exploited innocent miracles for cash. 16. Mao Zedong decided that sparrows were stealing grain, so he ordered the entire country to kill every bird. In 1958, the Chinese government launched the Four Pests campaign, encouraging citizens to bang pots and pans to keep birds flying until they dropped dead from exhaustion. People destroyed nests and shot millions of sparrows, thinking they were saving their food supply from thieves. But without the birds to eat the bugs, a massive plague of locusts swarmed the fields and ate every crop in sight. The ecological disaster caused a famine that killed millions, proving that nature does not like it when you mess with the food chain. 17. Dutch people in the 1600s lost their minds and their life savings over pretty flower bulbs. It was called tulip mania, and for a brief time a single tulip bulb cost more than a luxury mansion in Amsterdam. People sold their land and businesses just to buy a contract for a flower that had not even bloomed yet, hoping to get rich. The market was a total bubble that popped overnight, leaving thousands of investors holding worthless onions instead of gold. It was the first major economic crash in history, caused entirely by the fear of missing out on a trendy garden plant. 18. Americans in the 1920s had a very strange definition of entertainment that involved sitting on poles. The fad was called flagpole sitting, and people would climb up high poles and just sit there for weeks at a time to set records. A stuntman named Shipwreck Kelly became a national hero by sitting on a pole for 49 days while people cheered from below. It required zero athletic ability but amazing bladder control and the patience to do absolutely nothing while the world watched. It was the ultimate test of boredom that somehow captivated a generation before the invention of smartphones. 19. Politicians in Indiana almost broke the laws of mathematics because they did not understand how circles work. In 1897, a lawmaker introduced a bill that would legally redefine the value of pi to 3.2 to make calculations easier for everyone. The bill actually passed the State House unanimously because the politicians thought they were solving a difficult math problem for their constituents. It was only stopped in the Senate when a real mathematician happened to be in the building and explained that you cannot legislate geometry. It remains the dumbest attempt in history to change universal facts with a government vote. 20. Australia declared war on giant birds in 1932, and the birds actually won the fight decisively. Farmers were complaining that thousands of emus were eating their wheat crops, so the military sent soldiers armed with machine guns. The soldiers expected an easy victory, but the emus used guerrilla tactics and scattered in every direction to dodge the bullets. The birds were so fast and tough that the soldiers wasted thousands of rounds of ammunition while barely hitting any of the targets. The government eventually surrendered and withdrew the troops, leaving the emus as the undisputed champions of the Great Australian Bird War. 21. The Catholic Church once held a full trial for a defendant who had been dead for 7 months. Pope Stephen VI hated his predecessor, Pope Formosus, so much that he ordered the rotting corpse to be dug up and dressed in official robes. They propped the dead body on a throne, and a deacon stood next to it to answer questions for the silent skeleton. The crazy pope screamed at the carcass and found it guilty of perjury before ordering 3 fingers cut off the hand. The body was then dragged through the streets and thrown into the river, because apparently dying was not enough punishment for the angry church leadership. 22. A terrifying disco fever took over a French city long before catchy pop music was even invented. In 1518, a woman in Strasbourg walked into the street and started dancing uncontrollably without any music playing. She did not stop for days, and soon 400 other people joined her in a trance-like zombie dance marathon. They danced until their feet bled, and some actually died from heart attacks or pure exhaustion. The city officials made it worse by hiring a band to play music, thinking the dancers just needed to get it out of their systems. It remains a bizarre medical mystery where partying literally became a fatal disease. 23. Aliens might have called us in the 70s, but they left a voicemail that we still do not understand. Astronomer Jerry Amon was scanning the stars with a massive radio telescope when he detected a loud and complex signal from deep space. The data was so shocking that he circled the numbers on the printout and wrote the word "wow" in the margin with red pen. The signal lasted exactly 72 seconds and came from the constellation Sagittarius, but it never repeated. We have been listening to the static for decades, hoping they call back, but it seems the galaxy ghosted us after just one mysterious hello. 24. The United States and Britain almost started a massive war because of a hungry farm animal. An American farmer on San Juan Island shot a British pig that wandered into his garden to eat some potatoes. The British authorities wanted to arrest the farmer, but the Americans called in the military to defend his right to protect his spuds. It escalated until warships were aiming guns at each other, and thousands of troops were ready to die for the bacon. The standoff lasted for months, but thankfully the only casualty in the entire conflict was the pig who just wanted a snack. 25. London smelled so bad in the summer of 1858 that the entire government almost packed up and left. The River Thames was basically an open sewer filled with human waste and industrial garbage baking in the hot sun. The stench was so overpowering that Parliament soaked their curtains in chloride just to stop the politicians from vomiting during debates. They finally realized that building a modern sewer system was cheaper than moving the capital city to a fresh location. It was a smelly wake-up call that proved sanitation is actually the most important job of any civilization that wants to survive. 26. Some historians believe that 300 years of history were completely faked by three powerful liars. The phantom time hypothesis claims that the years 614 to 911 never actually happened and were invented to mess with the calendar. The theory says the Holy Roman Emperor and the Pope conspired to fast-forward time so they could rule during the year 1000. This would mean that the Emperor Charlemagne was a fictional character and we are currently living in the 18th century. It is a mind-bending conspiracy theory that suggests our entire timeline is just a clerical error made by medieval rulers. 27. A tiny island in Italy claims to be the smallest kingdom in the world thanks to a herd of goats. In the 19th century, a shepherd named Giuseppe moved his family to Tavolara and declared himself the king of the rock. When the real king of Sardinia visited to hunt golden-toothed goats, he was so amused that he recognized the title. Queen Victoria even sent a naval vessel to visit and collected a photo of the royal family for her palace. The island is still run by the descendants today who run a pizza restaurant while technically holding the title of royalty. 28. The US military spent millions of dollars trying to turn bats into living bombers during World War II. The plan was to strap tiny napalm canisters to thousands of Mexican free-tailed bats and drop them over Japanese cities. The idea was that the bats would roost in the wooden attics of houses and burn the entire infrastructure to the ground. The project was canceled after the bats accidentally escaped during a test and burned down an American airbase instead. It was a Looney Tunes idea that proved animals are terrible soldiers because they do not follow orders to destroy the enemy. 29. There is a mysterious book from the 15th century that nobody on Earth knows how to read. The Voynich manuscript is filled with illustrations of naked women and bizarre plants that do not exist in nature. It is written in a looping, elegant script that has baffled the best codebreakers from both world wars and modern supercomputers. Some think it is a spell book or a medical guide, while others think it is just an elaborate prank by a medieval artist. It sits in a library vault today, taunting humanity with secrets that might be profound or just total gibberish. 30. A school in Tanzania was forced to close down because the students could not stop laughing. In 1962, a joke started a fit of giggles among 3 girls that rapidly spread like a virus to the whole school. It was not happy laughter, but a hysterical mania that caused pain and fainting and lasted for hours or even days. The epidemic was so contagious it spread to nearby villages and affected 1,000 people, forcing schools to shut their doors. It was a bizarre case of mass psychogenic illness, where the human brain simply broke down and responded to stress with endless giggling. 31. A dog chasing a bone nearly caused a massive international war between 2 angry neighbors. In 1925, tensions between Greece and Bulgaria were already high when a Greek soldier's dog ran across the borderline. The soldier ran after his pet to catch him, but was immediately shot dead by a Bulgarian sentry who was guarding the fence. Greece was furious and launched a full military invasion to avenge the dog owner and bombarded a Bulgarian town. The League of Nations had to jump in and fine Greece for overreacting to a pet dispute. It was a deadly conflict where 50 people died all because a puppy did not understand geography. 32. Doctors in World War II discovered that the human brain is easily tricked into healing itself. When an American surgeon ran out of morphine while treating wounded soldiers, he decided to lie to them to keep them calm. He injected them with plain salt water, but told them it was a powerful painkiller, and the soldiers actually stopped feeling pain. Their brains believed the lie so strongly that they did not go into shock, which saved their lives on the battlefield. It was the accidental discovery of the placebo effect, proving that sometimes a good lie is just as effective as expensive medicine during a crisis. 33. A tsunami of alcohol drowned a London neighborhood in the weirdest industrial accident of the 19th century. In 1814, a massive iron hoop snapped on a giant fermentation vat at the Horseshoe Brewery, releasing over 300,000 gallons of dark porter. The wave of beer smashed through brick walls and flooded basements, killing 8 people who were crushed or drowned in the brew. Rescuers had to wade through waist-deep alcohol to find survivors, while some locals tried to scoop up the free drink. It was a tragedy that sounded like a joke, but left the streets smelling like a stale pub for weeks. 34. Bohemian rebels started a 30-year war by throwing politicians out of a castle window. In 1618, angry Protestants stormed the Prague castle and grabbed 3 Catholic officials who they felt were violating their religious rights. They tossed the men out of a 3rd-story window, expecting them to die on the cobblestones 70 feet below. But the men survived the fall because they landed in a giant pile of manure that had built up in the moat. The Catholics claimed angels saved them, while the rebels claimed it was just lucky poop. This ridiculous event sparked a conflict that devastated Europe for 3 decades. 35. A man who failed his civil service exams decided he was the younger brother of Jesus. Hong Xiuquan had a nervous breakdown in the 1800s and woke up claiming God told him to destroy the demons ruling China. He gathered millions of desperate followers and started a massive civil war that banned alcohol and separated husbands from wives. They captured major cities and established a heavenly kingdom that fought the imperial army for 14 bloody years. It remains one of the deadliest conflicts in human history, killing 20 million people, all because one guy had a fever dream and failed a government test. 36. Medieval Europe witnessed the saddest and dumbest youth movement in the history of religion. In 1212, thousands of children and teenagers decided they could march to Jerusalem and reclaim the holy city with love instead of weapons. They believed the Mediterranean Sea would part like the Red Sea and let them walk across dry land to the Holy Land. But when they reached the coast, the water stayed wet, and corrupt merchants sold many of the kids into slavery. Most of the children never returned home, dying of hunger or exhaustion in a tragic attempt to do a job that grown knights had failed at. 37. The weather completely broke in 1816, causing snow to fall in the middle of July. A massive volcano named Mount Tambora had erupted in Indonesia and threw so much ash into the sky that it blocked the sun worldwide. Farmers in New England watched their corn freeze in the fields while gloom and darkness covered Europe for months. The constant rain and cold forced Mary Shelley to stay indoors on her vacation, where she got bored and wrote Frankenstein. It was a global climate disaster that starved nations, but accidentally gave us the greatest monster movie character of all time. 38. A mysterious explosion in Siberia flattened 80 million trees without leaving a single crater behind. In 1908, the sky over the Tunguska River split open with a blast 1,000 times more powerful than the atomic bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The shockwave knocked people off their feet 40 miles away and lit up the night sky as far away as London. Scientists believe a meteor exploded in the air before hitting the ground, vaporizing instantly and crushing the forest below. It is the only time in modern history that a space rock has slapped the Earth that hard without actually touching it. 39. 9 experienced hikers ran out of their tents into the freezing snow without their shoes on. In 1959, a search party in the Ural Mountains found the camp of the Dyatlov group destroyed and their bodies scattered in the woods. The tent had been cut open from the inside, suggesting they were running from something instant and terrifying. Some bodies had strange injuries like fractured skulls and missing eyes, while their clothes contained traces of radiation. Theories range from an avalanche to military tests or even a Yeti attack, but nobody knows why they chose to freeze to death rather than stay inside. 40. Rich American bankers allegedly tried to hire a Marine general to overthrow the president. In 1933, legendary Major General Smedley Butler told Congress that wealthy businessmen plotted a fascist coup against Franklin D. Roosevelt. They wanted Butler to lead a private army of veterans to march on Washington and force the president to become a puppet figurehead. The businessmen hated the New Deal and wanted a dictator to protect their profits during the Great Depression. The media mocked the story at the time, but historians now believe the plot was real and only failed because Butler was too loyal to betray his country. 41. The U.S. Army defeated the Nazis using inflatable balloons and giant speakers instead of real tanks. During World War II, a top-secret unit called the Ghost Army was recruited from art schools and theaters to deceive the enemy. Their job was to fake massive troop movements, so they used inflatable rubber tanks and played recordings of heavy machinery on massive speakers. They even went to local bars in France and pretended to be drunk generals leaking fake battle plans to spies. These artists and actors staged a traveling roadshow of war that fooled the Germans completely and saved tens of thousands of American lives by drawing fire onto their fake rubber army. 42. The Austrian army once fought a massive battle against itself and somehow lost 10,000 men. In 1788, scouts bought some schnapps from travelers and refused to share it with the infantry, which started a drunken fistfight. Someone shouted that the Turks were attacking, and in the darkness, total panic spread through the camp. Officers shouted halt in German, which sounded like Allah to the non-German-speaking troops who started firing blindly. The artillery woke up and bombed their own men, while the emperor fell into a creek during the retreat. The real Turkish army arrived 2 days later and found 10,000 dead bodies without having fired a single shot. 43. Ancient Chinese officials invented a method of execution that was as creative as it was absolutely horrifying. It was called the pig basket atrocity and was reserved for the worst criminals who betrayed the state. The prisoner was tied up tightly and stuffed into a woven bamboo basket that was normally used to transport livestock. Then the basket was thrown into a pit filled with starving pigs who had not eaten for days. The pigs would smell the fresh meat inside the wicker and tear the basket apart to devour the person alive. It was a brutal reminder to the citizens that the legal system had very little sympathy for traitors. 44. Farmers in New Zealand faced a very humiliating problem when their pants started exploding spontaneously. In the 1930s, a new chemical weed killer called sodium chlorate became popular for killing ragwort on farms. The chemical dried on their wool work trousers and turned the fabric into a highly unstable explosive material. Friction or heat from a fireplace would cause the pants to detonate with a loud bang and a burst of flame. There were reports of farmers taking their pants off to dry by the fire only to watch them blow up. It was a fashion disaster where basic yard work turned everyday clothing into dangerous, unguided bombs. 45. A small town in Illinois was terrorized by a villain who probably did not even exist. In 1944, residents of Mattoon reported smelling a sweet, sickly odor before becoming paralyzed in their own homes. The newspapers dubbed the attacker the Mad Gasser, and panic spread as more people reported the same symptoms. Police and armed citizens patrolled the streets hunting for a man with a flit gun, but found absolutely nobody. It turned out to be a textbook case of mass hysteria fueled by pollution from a nearby factory. The town had literally scared itself sick over a phantom attacker who was really just a bad smell and an overactive imagination. 46. A woman in Kentucky was sitting on her porch when huge chunks of raw meat started raining from the clear blue sky. It looked like beef, but tasted like venison according to two brave men who actually ate the sky meat. The field was covered in flesh flakes that baffled the local press and terrified the religious neighbors. Scientists eventually determined that a flock of vultures flying overhead had likely vomited their last meal while in flight. It remains the grossest weather event in history, where a nice sunny afternoon was ruined by partially digested animal parts falling on a family farm. 47. A city in Honduras has a weather forecast that includes heavy storms with a chance of fresh seafood. Every year in the Department of Yoro, a massive storm rolls in, and when the rain stops, hundreds of living fish are found flopping on the ground. Locals believe it is a miracle from a legendary priest who prayed for food for the starving poor. Scientists think water spouts suck the fish from the ocean and dump them inland, but the locals do not care about the science. They just collect the free fish from the streets and cook a massive community dinner to celebrate the weirdest grocery delivery service on Earth. 48. Two wealthy brothers in New York City were killed by their own obsession with collecting garbage. Homer and Langley Collier filled their Harlem mansion with 100 tons of junk, including 14 pianos and a Model T Ford. They built intricate tunnels through the newspapers and set up deadly booby traps to keep intruders away from their trash. In 1947, Langley tripped one of his own traps and was crushed to death under a suitcase avalanche while bringing food to his blind brother. Homer starved to death just a few feet away because he could not escape the fortress of trash. It was a tragic end inside a museum of absolute madness. 49. A German farmer noticed strange footprints in the snow leading to his house, but none leading away. Days later, the entire family and their maid were found slaughtered in the barn with a pickaxe. The creepiest part was that the killer stayed in the house for days after the murders, feeding the cattle and eating the family food. Smoke was seen coming from the chimney, while the bodies lay cold in the barn just yards away. The police interviewed huge numbers of suspects, but never found the person who lived with the corpses. It remains one of the most chilling unsolved mysteries because the killer was essentially a ghostly roommate. 50. A well-dressed man was found dead on an Australian beach with no ID and all the labels cut off his clothes. The only clue in his pocket was a scrap of paper that said Tamam Shud, which means it is finished in Persian. Police found the book the page was torn from thrown in a nearby car, and it contained a secret code that nobody has ever cracked. He had distinct physical traits like missing teeth that matched no missing persons records anywhere in the world. To this day, nobody knows if he was a Cold War spy, a jilted lover, or just a random traveler who died with a secret. 51. Norway had its own spy thriller in 1970 involving a woman with 9 fake identities. Her body was found in the Isdalen Valley, severely burned on the front but untouched on the back. Police found her luggage at a train station, and it was like a spy movie starter pack. It contained wigs and non-prescription glasses and maps and codes written on notepads. She had traveled all over Europe using different passports and always requested a room with a balcony. Authorities ruled it a suicide, but she had swallowed 50 sleeping pills and was also poisoned by carbon monoxide near a fire. It is a Cold War mystery that still haunts the Norwegian police files. 52. Television signals in Chicago were hijacked by a guy wearing a rubber mask and sunglasses. In 1987, during a broadcast of Doctor Who, the screen suddenly cut to a man dressed as the character Max Headroom. He rambled incoherently about Chuck Swirsky and Pepsi, while buzzing noises drowned out the audio. Then the camera cut to him, bending over while a woman spanked him with a fly swatter before the station regained control. It was the most famous signal intrusion in history, and the culprit was never caught. Engineers were baffled at how someone overpowered the transmitter just to show the city his weird basement comedy routine. 53. A small town in Ohio was ripped apart by thousands of threatening anonymous letters. Starting in 1976, residents began receiving hateful notes that exposed their deepest secrets and affairs. The writer knew everything about everyone and terrified the population with threats of violence. One man was nearly killed by a booby trap gun rigged to a signpost that the letter writer told him to check. Even after a suspect was sent to prison, the letters continued to arrive from inside the jail. It was a slow-motion psychological torture campaign that turned neighbors against each other and proved that the postman can be the scariest person in town. 54. Michigan parents were paralyzed with fear during the winters of the late 70s. A predator was snatching kids off the streets and holding them for days before leaving their bodies in the snow. The strangest part was that the children were washed and dressed in pristine, clean clothes that did not belong to them. One victim was even fed his favorite meal of fried chicken right before he was killed. It seemed like the killer was trying to be a twisted father figure before ending their lives. The case remains unsolved, and the snowbanks of Detroit still hold the dark secrets of a man who vanished. 55. A man in a business suit pulled off the coolest heist in aviation history and disappeared. In 1971, a passenger named Dan Cooper calmly handed a flight attendant a note saying he had a bomb in his briefcase. He demanded $200,000 and 4 parachutes in exchange for the passengers' lives. Once he got the cash, he ordered the pilot to fly low over the forests of Washington state. Then, he lowered the rear stairs and jumped into the freezing stormy night wearing loafers and a trench coat. He was never seen again, and the only trace ever found was a rotting stack of bills. 56. 2 electronic technicians in Brazil went on a hike and died in the most confusing way possible. Their bodies were found on a hill wearing formal suits and waterproof raincoats with no signs of violence. The weirdest part was that both men were wearing handmade lead masks shaped like sunglasses to protect their eyes. A notebook found next to them contained cryptic instructions to be at a certain place and swallow capsules. It looked like they were waiting for a UFO or a radioactive event that never happened. They died waiting for something from the sky that only they knew about while wearing their bizarre metal goggles. 57. 5 friends went to a basketball game and ended up in a frozen nightmare. The men known as the Yuba County Five drove into the snowy mountains for no logical reason and abandoned their working car. They walked miles into the deep snow and eventually died of exposure and starvation. One man was found in a Forest Service trailer surrounded by enough canned food to last for months. He had starved to death while literally surrounded by heavy cans of military rations he refused to open. It is a tragic mystery of why 5 grown men seemingly forgot how to survive and walked willingly into the freezing dark. 58. A quiet resort cabin in California became the scene of a brutal house of horrors. In 1981, 3 family members and a friend were found bound and killed inside cabin 28. The killers had used knives and hammers in a frenzy that left the living room covered in blood. The strangest detail was that 3 young boys were sleeping in the next room and were completely unharmed during the massacre. The suspects fled into the woods, and the case went cold for decades due to police incompetence. It remains a terrifying reminder that even a relaxing vacation in the woods can turn into a real-life slasher movie. 59. A killer in Tokyo murdered a family and then stayed to surf the internet. On New Year's Eve in 2000, an intruder broke into the Miyazawa home and killed the parents and 2 children. Instead of fleeing the scene, the killer stayed in the house for hours eating ice cream from their fridge. He even used the family computer to book theater tickets and left his poop in the toilet without flushing. He left behind his clothes and the murder weapon, but despite thousands of police investigators, he was never identified. It was a crime so casual and disrespectful that it shocked the entire nation of Japan. 60. A family in Oklahoma drove into the mountains to look for land and vanished from the face of the earth. Their truck was found locked and abandoned with their dog nearly dead from starvation inside. The police found $32,000 in cash under the seat and a video of the couple, acting like zombies before they left. 4 years later, their skeletal remains were found lying side by side in the dirt miles away. Theories range from a drug deal gone wrong to witchcraft or a murder-suicide. It is a tragic story where a family road trip turned into a permanent disappearance in the woods. 61. 3 women vanished from a graduation party, leaving behind everything they owned. In 1992, 2 teenagers and a mother disappeared from a house in Missouri without a single struggle. Their cars were still in the driveway and their purses were sitting inside the unlocked house. The only clue was a shattered porch light globe that had been swept up on the front steps. It was as if they had been beamed up by aliens in the middle of the night, leaving their lives frozen in time. The police have chased thousands of leads, but the 3 women simply ceased to exist the moment they walked through the front door. 62. 3 girls went to the mall for some Christmas shopping and never came home to open their presents. In 1974, the girls visited the Seminary South Shopping Center in Texas and were seen happily walking through the stores. Their car was found in the parking lot, packed with wrapped gifts, but the girls were gone. A strange letter arrived later claiming they had run away, but the handwriting did not match the girls. It is a heartbreaking mystery where a joyful holiday outing turned into a 50-year nightmare for the parents. The mall was crowded with shoppers, yet nobody saw the moment the 3 friends were stolen. 63. A beautiful ship was found floating in the Atlantic Ocean completely empty of people. In 1872, the Mary Celeste was discovered, drifting under partial sail with plenty of food and water on board. The crew's personal belongings were still in the cabins, and a meal was set out on the table ready to eat. The only thing missing was the captain, his family, and the crew along with the lifeboat. There were no signs of a struggle or a storm that would force them to abandon a perfectly good ship. It is the ultimate ghost ship story where the ocean simply swallowed the people and left the boat behind. 64. Three lighthouse keepers vanished from a tiny rock island in Scotland, leaving a cryptic logbook. A relief ship arrived in 1900 to find the lighthouse dark and the keepers nowhere to be found. The kitchen table had a meal of meat and potatoes that was half-eaten, and a chair was knocked over. The final log entries described a massive storm that had terrified the experienced men, but weather reports said the sky was clear. The men were likely swept away by a rogue wave, but the mystery of the calm weather logs remains. It is a lonely tale of three men facing the wrath of the sea alone. 65. Australia lost its innocence the day three siblings disappeared from a crowded beach. In 1966, the Beaumont children took a bus to Glenelg Beach for a day of swimming and fun. Witnesses saw them playing with a tall, blonde man in his mid-30s who was buying them snacks. The children were never seen again, and the case sparked one of the largest police investigations in Australian history. Parents across the country stopped letting their kids play outside unsupervised, changing the culture forever. It is a tragic reminder that a sunny day at the beach can hide a monster in plain sight who is waiting to steal a family. 66. A house fire on Christmas Eve destroyed a home, but left a burning mystery behind. In 1945, the Sauter family home in West Virginia burned to the ground with 5 children trapped inside. But when the smoke cleared, there were no bones or remains found in the ash, which is scientifically impossible. The father believed the fire was a diversion to kidnap the kids because the phone lines had been cut beforehand. For decades, the parents put up billboards asking for information, believing their children were still alive somewhere. It is a sad story where a fire took the house, but a mystery took the children away forever. 67. A small town in Iowa was shattered when a killer wiped out an entire family and 2 guests. In 1912, 8 people were found bludgeoned to death in their beds with an axe belonging to the father. The killer had covered the mirrors with cloth and placed a piece of raw bacon next to the axe. He had hidden in the attic for hours, waiting for the family to fall asleep before coming down to strike. The house is now a tourist attraction where people pay to sleep in the murder room. It is a gruesome slice of history where the monster under the bed was actually a man in the attic. 68. A serial killer in California taunted the police with puzzles that took 50 years to solve. The Zodiac killer attacked couples in the late 60s and sent letters to newspapers taking credit for the crimes. He included complex ciphers filled with weird symbols and threatened to kill more people if they were not published. He wore a bizarre executioner hood with his crosshair symbol on the chest during one of the attacks. Despite his massive ego and constant communication with the press, he was never caught or identified. He remains the most famous unsolved phantom in American criminal history, who treated murder like a twisted game of chess. 69. London was terrorized by a shadowy figure who surgically dismantled women in the fog. In 1888, a killer stalked the Whitechapel district and brutally murdered 5 women with terrifying precision. He sent taunting letters to the police, including one that came with half of a human kidney. The media went into a frenzy naming him Jack the Ripper and creating a legend that terrified the world. The police suspected everyone from a local butcher to a member of the royal family but proved nothing. He vanished into the smog, leaving behind a legacy of fear that defined the Victorian era as a time of gaslights and sharp knives. 70. Hollywood had a real-life horror movie when a baked starlet was found cut in half. In 1947, the body of Elizabeth Short was discovered in a vacant lot in Los Angeles, drained of all blood. Her face had been carved into a permanent ghastly smile, and her body was posed like a mannequin. The press nicknamed her the Black Dahlia and turned her tragic death into a sensational tabloid circus. Hundreds of people confessed to the crime for attention, but the real killer was never found. It is the darkest story in Tinseltown history, showing that the path to fame can sometimes lead to a nightmare in a vacant lot. 71. A 6-year-old beauty queen was found dead in her basement while her parents slept upstairs. In 1996, John Benet Ramsey was discovered hours after her mother found a bizarre ransom note on the stairs. The letter demanded an amount that matched the father's bonus exactly, and was written with a pen from the house. Police made critical mistakes early on by letting friends walk through the crime scene and contaminate the evidence. The media turned the tragedy into a national obsession, analyzing every move the parents made. It remains a heartbreaking puzzle where a little girl in a tiara became the face of a mystery that America simply cannot solve. 72. Two teenage girls went for a hike on a beautiful bridge and managed to record their own killer. In 2017, Libby German and Abby Williams vanished in Indiana, leaving behind a chilling video clip on a smartphone. The grainy footage showed a man walking toward them and a voice ordering them down the hill. For years, that audio clip haunted the internet as amateur detectives tried to identify the voice of the monster. Police finally made an arrest years later, but the case spent a long time as a terrifying digital ghost story. It showed the world that a cell phone can be the most important witness at a crime scene. 73. A dog walking in the desert uncovered a mass grave that hid a decade of secrets. In 2009, a woman walking her dog in Albuquerque found a human bone that led police to the remains of 11 women and an unborn baby. The killer had used the desolate West Mesa as a personal graveyard for years, while the city grew around it. Satellite photos later showed tire tracks leading to the burial sites that had been visible from space for years. The police never caught the person responsible for the carnage. It is a grim reminder that the empty desert is often hiding things that were never meant to be found. 74. Police were looking for one missing woman and accidentally found a graveyard of serial killer victims. In 2010, officers searching near a beach highway in New York stumbled upon 4 bodies wrapped in burlap sacks. As they kept digging, they found even more remains hidden in the thick brambles along the ocean. The killer had been using the lonely stretch of road as a dumping ground for years without anyone noticing. It sparked a massive hunt for a predator who targeted vulnerable women and taunted their families with phone calls. The dunes of Gilgo Beach became a horrifying landmark where the ocean breeze could not wash away the terrible history. 75. 7 people in Chicago died just because they wanted to cure a simple headache. In 1982, a maniac started opening bottles of Tylenol in stores and replacing the medicine with lethal cyanide capsules. Victims collapsed within minutes of taking the pills, sparking a nationwide panic, where people were afraid of their own medicine cabinets. Police drove through streets with loudspeakers warning citizens not to take any painkillers. The killer was never caught, but his actions changed the world forever by forcing companies to invent tamper-proof safety seals. It is the reason why it takes you 5 minutes of struggle just to open a bottle of vitamins today. 76. A killer in New York had a twisted obsession with the alphabet and matching initials. In the early 70s, 3 young girls were assaulted and killed in Rochester, and each had a first and last name starting with the same letter. Carmen Colon was found in Churchville, while Wanda Walkowicz was found in Webster. It was a sick pattern that looked like a game designed to mock the police investigators. The symmetry of the crimes terrified the community because it felt like a ritual rather than random violence. Despite the obvious clues and suspects, the person who treated murder like a spelling bee was never brought to justice. 77. The capital of the United States was haunted by a killer who dumped his victims on the highway. In the early 70s, the freeway phantom kidnapped young girls and left their bodies along the busy roads of Washington, D.C. He once left a note in a victim's pocket claiming he was sensitive and hated killing, but did it anyway. He even made a chilling phone call to a mother where the only sound was a girl screaming in the background. It was a reign of terror that paralyzed the city, but the phantom eventually just stopped. He disappeared back into the traffic, leaving behind a cold case that still frustrates detectives. 78. Lovers in Italy were terrified to park their cars at night because of a pistol-packing voyeur. The monster of Florence stalked the hills of Tuscany for nearly 20 years, targeting young couples seeking privacy in their vehicles. He would shoot them with a distinct .22 caliber gun and then mutilate the bodies with surgical precision. The police arrested multiple suspects, including a furious squad of peep shows regulars, but the crimes remained murky. It was a bloodbath that turned the romantic Italian countryside into a danger zone. The beautiful hills of Florence hold a dark secret about a man who hated love enough to destroy it with bullets. 79. A serial killer in Scotland picked up women at a dance hall and quoted scripture while killing them. In the late 60s, a man known as Bible John met 3 women at the Barrowland Ballroom in Glasgow. He was charming and well-dressed, but he strangled them with their own stockings on the way home. The only witness described him as a polite man who quoted verses from the Old Testament and hated sinful behavior. It was a terrifying contradiction of a religious fanatic who committed the ultimate sin. The police never found the dancing preacher and the music at the ballroom played on, while the mystery remained unsolved. 80. A jazz-loving maniac threatened to kill anyone who was not listening to his favorite music. In 1919, the Axeman of New Orleans sent a letter to the newspapers claiming he would spare any house playing jazz music. On the designated night, the entire city blasted jazz from every window and club to stay safe. It was the loudest night in the history of the city as terrified residents danced to survive the axe. The killer never struck that night and vanished shortly after leaving the city with a bizarre legacy. It was the only time in history that playing a saxophone could literally save your life from a murderer. 81. The famous detective who took down Al Capone was completely defeated by a swamp killer. Elliot Ness became the safety director of Cleveland, but could not stop the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run. The killer decapitated at least 12 drifters and drained their bodies of blood before dumping them in a shantytown. He mocked Ness by placing remains in plain sight of his office window. Ness grew frustrated and burned down the shantytown to flush out the killer, but it only made the public angry. The headless bodies stopped appearing eventually, but the legendary lawman went to his grave knowing he had been outsmarted by a phantom with a knife. 82. A town on the border of Texas and Arkansas was locked down by a masked phantom. In 1946, the phantom killer attacked couples parked on lovers' lanes under the full moon. He wore a white sack over his head with holes cut out for eyes looking like a horror movie villain. The town was so terrified that residents bought every gun and lock available and nailed their windows shut. Police patrolled the streets, but the phantom always seemed to be one step ahead of the law. The attacks stopped as suddenly as they began leaving the town, to wonder if their neighbor was the man behind the white mask. 83. Police in Europe spent years hunting a female supercriminal who was actually just a factory error. DNA from a mysterious woman was found at 40 different crime scenes across Germany and Austria, including murders and burglaries. They called her the Phantom of Heilbronn and spent millions trying to catch this master thief. It turned out the DNA belonged to an innocent woman working in the factory that made the cotton swabs used by police. The officers were essentially tracking the woman who packaged their equipment. It was a hilarious and expensive lesson on why you should always wear gloves when making tools for forensic science. 84. Millions of people still believe that the greatest achievement in human history was filmed on a soundstage. The moon landing conspiracy claims that NASA hired director Stanley Kubrick to fake the Apollo 11 landing because they could not really get to space. They point to waving flags in a vacuum and weird shadows as proof of the deception. It implies that the thousands of scientists and engineers involved all managed to keep a massive secret for 50 years. It is a ridiculous theory that insults the bravery of astronauts, but proves that people love a good story more than they love the hard facts of rocket science. 85. A patch of ocean between Florida and Puerto Rico is blamed for eating airplanes and ships. The Bermuda Triangle became a cultural phenomenon where pilots supposedly vanished into thin air or were grabbed by aliens. Writers sold millions of books claiming that Atlantis or time warps were responsible for the disappearances. In reality, statistics show that ships do not sink there any more often than in other busy parts of the ocean. The mystery is mostly just bad weather and human error, mixed with a lot of hype. It is a legendary monster that turned out to be nothing more than stormy water and bad navigation. 86. Thousands of people have risked their lives searching for a gold mine that might not exist. The legend of the Lost Dutchman's mine claims a German immigrant hid a massive stash of gold somewhere in the Superstition Mountains of Arizona. He died without revealing the location, leaving behind cryptic clues that drive treasure hunters crazy. People still wander into the harsh desert heat every year, hoping to strike it rich, and some never come back. It is a deadly obsession where the allure of buried treasure overrides the basic instinct of survival. The mountains keep their secrets while the ghost of the Dutchman laughs at the greedy. 87. a hole in the ground in Nova Scotia, has baffled treasure hunters for over 200 years. The Oak Island Money Pit was discovered by teenagers who found a depression in the dirt and started digging. Every few feet they found layers of logs and coconut fibers, but the hole would always flood with seawater. Millions of dollars have been spent drilling and digging for pirate gold or the Holy Grail. 6 people have died trying to solve the puzzle, fulfilling a prophecy that 7 must die before the treasure is found. It is the world's most frustrating construction project that offers nothing but mud and mystery. 88. A man left behind 3 secret codes that supposedly lead to a massive fortune in Virginia. Thomas Beale allegedly buried millions in gold and silver in the 1820s and wrote 3 ciphers to reveal the location. One code was cracked using the Declaration of Independence as a key, but it only described the treasure, not where it is. The other 2 codes remain unsolved despite the best efforts of computer scientists and the military. It might be an elaborate hoax created to sell pamphlets, but it keeps cryptographers awake at night. The gold is either waiting in the ground or it never existed in the first place. 89. A clay plate from ancient Greece is the world's oldest printed mystery. The Phaistos disc was found in a palace in Crete and is covered in stamped symbols arranged in a spiral. The symbols represent people and plants and tools, but nobody knows what language it is or what it says. It dates back nearly 4,000 years and is one of the earliest examples of movable type printing. Linguists have tried to link it to every language on Earth, but the disc refuses to give up its secrets. It sits in a museum as a mocking reminder that we have lost so much of our own history. 90. A simple monument in a British garden contains a code that even Charles Darwin could not crack. The Shugborough inscription is a sequence of letters carved below a stone relief of a famous painting. The letters OUOSVAVV have baffled code breakers for centuries and sparked wild theories about the Holy Grail. Some think it is a love note, while others believe it reveals the location of religious artifacts. It is a puzzle carved in stone that stands in plain sight, mocking every genius who tries to read it. The true meaning likely died with the person who paid for the statue. 91. A sculpture sitting right in the middle of the CIA headquarters is mocking the smartest spies in the world. Jim Sanborn built the Kryptos monument in 1990 and covered it with thousands of scrambled letters that hide 4 secret messages. The NSA and CIA have managed to crack the first 3 passages, which contain poetic phrases and coordinates. But the 4th section is just 97 characters long and nobody can solve it. It is incredibly embarrassing that the agency responsible for cracking enemy codes cannot read the art in their own cafeteria courtyard. The artist is still alive and refuses to give them the answer, essentially trolling the entire intelligence community. 92. The dead man on the Australian beach left behind a code that took 70 years to even scratch. While the body was a mystery, the real puzzle was the book scrap with the words Tamam Shud found in his pocket. Under a microscope, investigators found a faint string of random letters like Margot AB pressed into the paper. For decades, spies and police tried to break it without success. Recently, a professor used modern analysis to suggest it might be a specific prayer book code. It is a slow-motion breakthrough that proves the Somerton man was likely playing a spy game that was much more complex than anyone realized. 93. The dancing plague was not just one isolated event, but a weird fever that swept across Europe for centuries. In the town of Aachen, thousands of people began to jump and twitch in 1374, forming circles of chaotic movement. They screamed that they saw demons and could not stop moving their legs until they collapsed from exhaustion. Priests tried to exorcise them, believing they were possessed by the devil, while others blamed hot blood. It was a mass psychological contagion where fear and stress forced entire villages to dance until they dropped. It remains the only time in history where the dance floor was actually a scene of medical horror. 94. Doctors once proved that fake surgery works just as well as the real thing for certain conditions. In a famous medical experiment, surgeons treated patients with bad knees by slicing them open and doing absolutely nothing before sewing them back up. The patients who got the fake surgery reported that their pain was gone, and they felt completely cured. It proved that the human mind is so powerful it can heal the body just because a guy in a white coat said so. It is a terrifying thought that some medical miracles are actually just your brain, playing a very convincing trick on your nervous system. 95. The sky has a history of throwing living creatures at people who are just trying to walk outside. Throughout history, there have been documented reports of frogs and spiders, and even snakes falling from storm clouds. In 2015, residents in Australia saw millions of baby spiders raining down and covering the landscape in webs. Scientists say that strong winds can suck small animals into the upper atmosphere and transport them for miles. It turns a weather forecast into a horror movie where you need an umbrella to protect yourself from falling biological hazards. Nature really loves to surprise us with flying zoos from the clouds. 96. Rocks in the California desert are moving around by themselves and leaving long trails in the dirt. The sailing stones of Death Valley slide across the flat lake bed, often moving in parallel lines or making sharp turns. For years, nobody ever saw them move, so people blamed aliens or magnetic fields or pranksters. Finally, scientists used time-lapse cameras to discover that thin sheets of ice form on cold nights and push the rocks when the wind blows. It was a simple answer to a spooky riddle, but it took humans a century to catch the rocks in the act of racing each other across the sand. 97. A town in New Mexico is plagued by a low-frequency noise that is slowly driving people crazy. The Taos hum is a faint droning sound, like a diesel engine idling in the distance, but only some people can hear it. It sits right at the edge of human hearing and causes headaches and insomnia for the unlucky residents. Scientists have sent teams with sensitive microphones, but they cannot find the source of the vibration. It is a maddening auditory torture that proves you cannot simply close your ears when the world decides to make a noise that does not technically exist. It remains a mystery that vibrates inside the brain. 98. The ocean made a noise in 1997 that was so loud it scared the entire scientific community. Underwater microphones, separated by 3,000 miles, all picked up an ultra-low frequency sound called the bloop. It sounded like a massive beast growling in the deep and was far louder than any whale or animal known to man. People immediately speculated that a giant sea monster, or Cthulhu, was waking up at the bottom of the Pacific. Years later, scientists ruined the fun by proving it was just an ice quake from a cracking iceberg. It was a disappointment for monster lovers, but a massive relief for sailors everywhere. 99. The universe sent us a text message in the 70s, and we are still staring at the phone. The WOW signal remains the strongest candidate for extraterrestrial contact because of its unique frequency of 1420 MHz. This is the frequency of hydrogen which aliens would likely use to communicate across the vast darkness. The signal came from a blank spot in the sky and hit the receiver with 30 times the normal background noise. Despite pointing our best ears at that spot for decades, the silence has never been broken again. It is the ultimate cosmic cliffhanger that suggests someone is out there, but they are very shy. 100. A valley in Norway has been hosting a light show for decades that defies all scientific explanation. The Hessdalen lights appear as bright white or yellow orbs that float above the horizon and sometimes streak across the sky. They can last for seconds or over an hour and have been tracked by radar, proving they are physical objects. Scientists have set up permanent cameras and measured the lights, but still cannot agree on what causes them. Some think it is ionized dust or plasma created by the valley geology. It is a real-life UFO hotspot where the lights are always on but nobody knows who is flipping the switch. 101. Texas has its own ghostly lanterns that have been spooking cowboys and tourists since the 19th century. The Marfa lights appear on the horizon near the Chinati Mountains and look like dancing basketballs of fire. They merge and split and change colors while hovering over the desert floor in the dark. Skeptics claim they are just headlights from a nearby highway, but reports of the lights exist from before cars were invented. It has become a major tourist trap where people gather nightly to watch the inexplicable show. It is a beautiful mystery that keeps the spirit of the Wild West alive with a touch of the supernatural. 102. The 1904 Olympic Marathon. Likely the most disastrous sporting event in history. The winner was given rat poison and brandy as a performance enhancer mid-race. Another runner was chased a mile off course by wild dogs, and a third participant, who arrived first, was disqualified because he hitchhiked in a car for 11 miles of the race. 103. The Kentucky Meat Shower, 1876. For several minutes, chunks of red meat rained down from a completely clear sky over a farm in Olympia Springs, Kentucky. Two men who tasted it said it tasted like venison or mutton. The leading theory is that a massive flock of vultures vomited in sync while flying overhead. 104. Tsutomu Yamaguchi, the double survivor. He was in Hiroshima on business when the first atomic bomb dropped. He survived, bandaged his wounds, and traveled home to Nagasaki. He was literally in the middle of explaining the horror of the first bomb to his boss when the second atomic bomb detonated over Nagasaki. He survived both and lived to be 93. 105. The Great Molasses Flood, 1919. A massive storage tank burst in Boston, releasing a wave of molasses 25 feet high, moving at 35 mph. It wasn't a slow spill. It was a violent tsunami of syrup that flattened buildings, snapped steel girders, and killed 21 people. 106. The Demon Core. Incidents: 1945 or 1946. A subcritical mass of plutonium intended for a third W-2 bomb killed two physicists in separate accidents. In the second incident, Louis Slotin was separating the core's beryllium halves with a flathead screwdriver. The screwdriver slipped, the core went critical, and a flash of blue light filled the room. Slotin covered the core with his body to shield others, telling them, "Well, that does it," knowing he was a dead man. 107. The Lake Nyos Disaster, 1986. A volcanic lake in Cameroon suddenly burped, releasing a massive invisible cloud of 1.6 million tons of carbon dioxide. Because CO2 is heavier than air, it hugged the ground and flowed into valleys, silently suffocating 1,546 people and 30,500 livestock in their sleep within minutes. 108. Project A-119. In the late 1950s, the U.S. Air Force developed a top-secret plan to detonate a nuclear bomb on the visible surface of the moon. The sole purpose was a show of force, to create a mushroom cloud visible from Earth so the Soviets would be intimidated. 109. The Great Emu War, 1932. The Australian government deployed soldiers armed with Lewis machine guns to cull the emu population destroying crops in Western Australia. The birds proved surprisingly resilient and used guerrilla tactics to scatter. After wasting thousands of rounds of ammunition, the military withdrew. The emus won. 110. The Dancing Plague of 15 to 18. In Strasbourg, a woman began dancing fervently in the street. Within a month, 400 people had joined her. They could not stop. They danced for days until they collapsed and died from heart attacks, strokes, or sheer exhaustion. Authorities at the time even hired musicians to keep them moving, thinking they needed to dance it out. 111. Vesna Vulovic's Fall, 1972. A Serbian flight attendant survived a mid-air explosion of her plane. She fell 330 feet, 160 meters, without a parachute. She was trapped in the tail section of the plane, which crashed into a snowy mountainside at the perfect angle to slide. She holds the world record for the highest fall survived without a parachute. And that is 111 reasons why reality is officially a glitch in the simulation. So if your brain is completely melted, smash that like button and subscribe. To Dumb History, because we are just getting started. Now I need a serious verdict in the comments. Would you rather catch a falling chunk of the Kentucky meat shower in your mouth, or go to war against the Australian emu army? Let me know your choice below. And if you think this list was wild, you are not ready for the absolute disaster in this video right here, so click it now and I'll see you inside.